Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge, with respect, the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, on whose traditional territory the university stands. The Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And given the focus of our talk and our discussion tonight, it's especially important to remember how Indigenous peoples and their lands continue to be disproportionately impacted by the forces of appropriation and extraction that drive our carbon economies, as well as by the climatic consequences and catastrophic weather events that are the result of our collective actions and inactions. My name is David Leach. I'm a professor of creative nonfiction in the Department of Writing and the acting director of the professional writing program in journalism and publishing. As your host tonight, I'd like to welcome you all to the University of Victoria and the 2024 Harvey S. Southam Lecture in Journalism and Publishing. First of all, though, I'd like to thank the colleagues, students, and staff in the Department of Writing, the Faculty of Fine Arts, Media Services, and the UVic Bookstore for helping to organize this annual event that welcomes a prominent voice from journalism and nonfiction storytelling to share their hard-learned wisdom in a free public talk, in a discussion, Q&A, and in smaller classroom events and seminars with our students. Now in its 16th year, the annual public talk would not be possible without the generous support of the Southam family, whose donation was made in memory of Harvey Stevenson Southam. The son of Gordon and Gertrude Southam, Harvey Southam was a graduate of UVic who worked as a journalist at the Winnipeg Tribune, the Vancouver Province, and the Vancouver Sun, before serving as director of a number of Southam family's companies and founder and editor of Equity magazine in Vancouver. Past Southam lecturers have included Jody Patterson, Sandra Martin, Richard Wagamese, Terry Glavin, Joanne Roberts, Mark Young, Vivian Smith, Tom Hawthorne, Judith Pike, Farah Nosh, Andrew Nicafort, David Beers, and Erica Geis. Several of these Southam alumni are in the audience tonight if you're looking to add to your autograph collection. And now I would like to introduce you to this year's guest lecturer. John Vaillant is an author and freelance writer based in Vancouver, BC, whose work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, National Geographic, and The Guardian, among many, many others. His journalism, fiction, and nonfiction explore the collisions between human ambition and the natural world. His first book, The Golden Spruce, a true story of myth, madness, and greed, was a bestseller that won the Governor General's and Writers' Trust Awards for nonfiction. His second nonfiction book, The Tiger, a true story of vengeance and survival, earned the BC Achievement Award for nonfiction, was selected for Canada Reads, published in 16 languages, and proclaimed a masterpiece by Outside Magazine. In 2015, just to make other writers even more envious, he switched to fiction and published his debut novel, The Jaguar's Children, which was longlisted for the Dublin Impact and Kirkus Fiction Prizes and was a finalist for the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize. For his latest book, he returned to the expansive genre of narrative nonfiction and applied his mastery of rigorous scientific research, compelling human profiles, propulsive narrative tension, and clear-eyed moral vision to the causes, chaos, and consequences of the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfires. His book, Fire Weather, subtitled The Making of a Beast here in Canada and a True Story from a Hotter World South of the Border, dramatizes a multi-billion-dollar disaster that melted vehicles, turned entire neighborhoods into firebombs, and drove 88,000 people from their homes in a single afternoon. It also throws open a window to look upon humankind's rapidly evolving and increasingly fraught relationship with fire. His masterful narrative has captivated readers around the world. Fire Weather won the British Baillie Gifford Prize, aka the Nonfiction Booker, the Sean C. Cohen Prize, and the John Wesley Defoe Book Prize. It was a finalist for the National Book Award, Canada's Writer Trust Nonfiction Prize, and the 2024 Pulitzer Prize in General Nonfiction. It has been named one of the best books of 2023 by the New York Times, Washington Post, The New Yorker, Time, NPR, Slate, and Smithsonian. I've read Fire Weather twice already and will again, and if you don't have a copy yet, I can point you in the right directions. Please pick it up. This powerful indictment of our petroleum addiction has landed Vaillant on acclaimed magazine's Power List of Climate Canadians at number 4, and the Independent's Climate 100 list, alongside Bill McKibben, Greta Thunberg, and Leonardo DiCaprio. At this point, I'm not sure if he needs any more accolades, but I'd like to end with the highest superlative that a fellow author can bestow. John Vaillant writes books, not just that I wish I had written, but that I wish I could write. He draws upon the deepest powers of that ancient art of storytelling to make us see the world anew, to feel its fractures in our bones and our blood, to hear the voices of our fellow humans caught amid the crisis of our time, to awaken our slumbering consciences to our failures as a society to forestall the coming age of fire, and to recognize the urgent need to act together. Please join me in welcoming the 2024 Harvey S. Southam Lecturer, John Vaillant.
My work is done. You know, that was really lovely. Thanks. So thank you to David Leach, who has sort of shepherded this through the past few months, and Deborah Campbell, who's here also, who kind of got this whole ball rolling and put my name up, and I'm really proud to be here. We heard the list of previous alum, and some of them are here tonight, and really glad to be numbered and named among them. Yeah, the Southam family who's made this all possible, and they're why we're here tonight. So thank you. And I had the most incredible flight over. My God, it was so beautiful and just crystalline and just truly exalted. And so I've been sort of high all day on whatever is wafting around in Victoria. Yes, no extra chemicals needed, really. So I'm just going to dive right in here and motor through. I have a lot that I would like to share with you today. So I spent the last 7 years researching fire weather because it's clear to me that climate disruption, of which fire is just one manifestation, is the issue of our time. It's an atmospheric issue, it's an environmental issue, it's a political issue, it's an infrastructure issue, it's a social justice issue. Climate disruption will impact every aspect of our lives for the rest of our lives. If there was ever any doubt that this was so, last summer of 2023 settled it. We all saw the smoke. Too many of us saw the fire. Things feel different now. Weather is different now. And fire is different now. The Earth's expressions are intensifying and accelerating. About 100 years ago, the American writer Ernest Hemingway wrote a novel called The Sun Also Rises. And there are a couple of lines in it that have been on my mind lately. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said. Gradually, and then suddenly. And this applies equally well to the last 50 years of observed and tracked climatic changes. We know the air is getting hotter because we can feel it. In July of 2023, Thomas Smith, an environmental geographer at the London School of Economics, made a sober observation to the BBC. And he said, "I'm not aware of a similar period when all parts of the climate system were in record-breaking or abnormal territory." 2023 was a turning point. What appears to be happening now is a kind of nonlinear acceleration. Look at any metric of planetary distress. So these are global temperatures for autumn, kind of averaged out across the planet. And this is 40 years of tracked temperatures, and it's lurching along, lurching upward. And then 2023, it takes this kind of alarming jump. These are North Atlantic sea surface temperatures, last 40 years. That dotted line running through it is the average. That colorful spaghetti are previous years. That really high red one that kind of peaks out at the top there, that's 2023, and then creeping in from the left is 2024. Sorry, this chart's slightly out of date, but this is what 2024 looks like at the North Pole. So again, this is the last 40 years or so. That dotted line is the average. And then when you look at what 2024 is doing, it's like it's just on this other path. And as far as I know, climate scientists have not been able to explain exactly what's going on there. To me, it looks like feedback loops, but anyway, we're going to find out. Some early map makers described unknown parts of the globe, terra incognita. Our planet and our civilization are entering clima incognita, the unknown climate. In so doing, we are departing the Holocene epoch, the Goldilocks zone of relative climate stability that enabled us to build the world as we know it over the past 12,000 years. To borrow from another children's story, The Three Little Pigs, we've built our homes and infrastructure out of 20th century straw, and now there's a 21st century wolf at the door. The wolf is climate change in the form of extreme weather. We should recognize this moment for what it is, the beginning of a new era of civilizational retreat, contraction, and consolidation. Call it the post-Holocene. The American insurance industry is entering a period of crisis in which wide swaths of the United States, the Gulf Coast and the West Coast so far, are becoming uninsurable. Capitalism, already a dubious proposition, has a hard time functioning without protections of this kind, and so does our society. The American writer William Gibson described this moment perfectly when he said, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." And there's another term I want to introduce to you. Alex Steffen is a really excellent futurist working out of Berkeley. I really invite you, urge you to look at his work. He is, kind of taking a gimlet eye at the future and writes about ruggedization and various other things that we can probably expect. And he is sober and clear-eyed, and I need to be feeling particularly brave before I read him. But he describes a discontinuity as an event or situation wherein past experience ceases to be a useful guide to future problem solving. And firefighters have been experiencing discontinuity more and more often over the past decade or two, and this year, 2023, was relentless. How are you supposed to respond to this? So fire radiative power is the raw energy coming off the leading edge of a wildfire. Normally it's measured in megawatts. Canadian fires are so big that they had to resort to terawatts. A terawatt is 1 trillion watts. It's the kind of energy that you power Beijing with, power Tokyo with. So you can see in the lower right-hand corner, these are previous terawattages, if you will, of previous Canadian fire seasons. And then 2023, it's like it's measuring something different. It's like someone tied a balloon to it and let it go. And so 42 terawatts is what Neil Leroux out of the University of Nevada, using satellite data, calculated the Canadian wildfires to be generating. And it's just another order. No one's been here before. This is another way to measure it. Again, we see previous fires, and we were out here. We saw some very intense fire seasons over the past 10 years. Again, 2023 in a class by itself. That's actually not even a complete tally. I think it was closer to 16 or 18 million hectares, which is basically Uruguay or Florida or Oklahoma. Here's another way to measure it. These are evacuees from the 2023 fire season. We had 250,000 Canadians on the road in 2023, driven from their homes by fire or the threat of fire, not knowing when they would go home again and what would be there when they got there. And these are, we'd call them refugees in another country. And this brings to mind the Red Cross Canada. I did a keynote there, and Conrad Sauvé, their CEO, told me that when he started working for the Red Cross about 15 years ago, 80% of their work was outside the country, which is where you would expect a wealthy, generous country like Canada to be doing most of its relief work. Now, this is probably the heaviest stat I'm going to give you. 80% of Red Cross Canada's work is inside Canada. So it's unevenly distributed. It's an extraordinary moment we find ourselves in. Never before have technology, culture, and nature been moving so quickly, simultaneously? And one reason I think we have a hard time wrapping our heads around this is because we're used to being the stars of the show. Historically, it's been humans who've outpaced the natural world. From arrowheads to AI, our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time. But now, geologic time, climate time, atmospheric time is moving as fast, in some cases faster than we are, faster than history, faster than technology. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we changed it. I began to understand the implications of this acceleration when Fort McMurray caught on fire in May 2016. Fort McMurray, Alberta, it turns out, is a good place to learn about fire and petroleum and how they fuel the volatile and all-consuming appetites of petrocapitalism. There are a couple of pieces to this, and I'm going to go through them in the order that I first explored them. I'll start with fire. If you live in Canada, there's a term you need to know. So the WUI, it's kind of fun to say, and it's kind of fun to be in. You know, we're in it right now. It's really beautiful, and it's where the wild land butts up against the built environment. It's really a sweet spot for human beings, but it's also where wildfires come from, with increasingly grievous results. And thinking of Lahaina, but also thinking of Valparaiso, Chile, which might not even be on your radar, but 200 people were killed outside of Valparaiso just this past spring. This is a typical wildfire. You've probably all seen this. It's usually safely on the other side of a ridge, and in Canada we can be confident that competent people are dealing with it. We don't really have to worry about it. You can tell from the pale smoke that it's not really intense, and it's probably not going to be a huge problem besides a bit of smoke in the air. This is what folks in Fort McMurray were looking at 6 in the evening on May 2nd, 2016. This photo was taken by a firefighter from Fire Hall 5, about 5 or 7 kilometers south of downtown. Again, it's a wildfire. It's out in the forest. Wildfire fighters are dealing with it, but you can tell by those coils that there's a lot of intensity there. And by the black smoke, you can infer, at least in Canada, that it's into some black spruce, but houses also burn black. So, and you can see another one off to the side. And so this was what people were watching from their porches and from their cars. And no one could really imagine the possibility that that would come into their community. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from the book, and we're going to kind of go ahead to the morning of May 3rd, when fire chief, wildfire manager were still saying, there's a fire out there, but go to school, go to work, do your day, just stay tuned. In Fort McMurray, May 3rd began differently for everyone, but it ended the same. For Chandra Linder, it began with a rite of spring. Linder was a labor relations advisor who worked for Syncrude. Linder's husband, Corey, an engineer, was employed there too, and so were many of their friends. Blonde, with a pixie cut, Linder is fit and warm and does not suffer fools. It makes sense once you get to know her, but to an outsider it might be surprising to see someone so polished and female in such a remote, industry-oriented, testosterone-heavy place. So up at site, up at these upgraders and mines, the gender breakdown is about 25 to 1. So it's a super weird place to be a woman. It's very overdetermined. If you want to read a really good book about that, read Kate Beaton's Ducks, which really it's a beautiful read and a difficult read. So it makes sense, let's see. Yeah, for work, Linder dresses accordingly. Minimal makeup, high collars, dark pants, no heels. Clothes suitable for climbing in and out of trucks and SUVs, for working in a world of working men. Linder had already seen the smoke plume southwest of town because everyone had seen it. A windswept cauliflower of billowing grays and browns that appeared to have sprouted full-blown from the forest on Sunday afternoon. It had been growing since then, but it was still miles away, and it wasn't the only one. Over the weekend, the Linders had hosted friends evacuated due to another fire. It was almost a lark. They took photos of the big plume developing across the river the same way one would a sunset or a rainbow. Their friends went home the next day because forestry was on it. Boots were on the ground. Water bombers were in the air. As far as the Linders were concerned, whatever was out there was being handled because that's what people do in Fort McMurray. They handle things. And certainly the beginning of May was a little early for fires. There were still car-sized blocks of winter ice on the riverbanks, and some local lakes had yet to thaw, but otherwise this was nothing new. Fires cloud the horizon every spring and summer up here. As Chandra and Corey said, practically in unison, it happens every year. Given the unseasonable heat, it was 33 Celsius that day, breaking the old record for that date by 6 degrees. And the fact that 5 separate wildfires had ignited around the city that weekend, it's hard to overstate how unconcerned was Fort McMurray's citizenry. But if you were up at dawn on May 3rd, as Chandra Linder was, and you'd seen the sky so full of summer promise as she had, you might understand why. The brilliance of that morning was so exceptional that after her morning shower, Linder did something she hadn't done in a long time. She pulled out her favorite navy blue suit with the skirt, picked some medium heels to go with it, and left her socks in the drawer. Thus attired, she headed off to work in Syncrude's head office north of town. In her garage, there were a few vehicles to choose from, and in keeping with her outfit and her mood, Linder picked the car she calls the little one, a black Porsche that hadn't seen daylight in 6 months. So there was a census done in 2016, same year as the fire, and one of the things it revealed was that the median household income in Fort McMurray, 2 years after a major downturn in oil prices, was still $200,000 a year, making it one of the wealthiest municipalities on the continent. Winters are long and dark in Fort McMurray, but this one was over. Spring was here, and Linder felt as beautiful and hopeful as the day. So I'm going to jump ahead, same day. I'm jump ahead about 3 hours, 4 hours. Still feeling the symptoms of spring fever, Chandra Linder knocked off work at lunch and organized herself for a 2 o'clock meeting at Syncrude's downtown office in the Borealis building. With no traffic, it's a 30-minute drive down the highway. Still 20 kilometers north of town, she was rounding a long, gradual bend in the river when her windshield filled with something she did not recognize. When I got that first view of it, said Linder, I went, hang on a second. It was clear overhead, but to the south, it was black. Black smoke with streaks of red in it. It took up the whole sky. I'm trying to make sense of this thing. I'm thinking, well, maybe it just looks closer than it is. I'm thinking, maybe the red is the sun shining through smoke. But it's not the sun. It's in the wrong place. And then I realized it's flame. Linder had seen a lot of fire plumes, but this didn't look like any of them. So I pull over to the side of the highway and I call my guy Byron and I say, are we having this meeting? And he's like, no, we are not having this meeting. Don't come in. And I'm like, I'm looking at a wall of flames here. It was a short call, in part because no one was quite sure what to say next. What do you say on a beautiful spring day when the city where you live and conduct business appears to be on fire? After hanging up, Linder continued on to her exit where she turned west, back up the hill and out of the river valley. Okay, she said, not right, but here's what I do. I'm going to go home anyway. I drive past the dry cleaners. Well, I'm going to drop off my stuff at Sam's place because in my mind, the fire's still on the other side of the river, downtown. So I'm dropping my stuff off and this guy comes in from the golf course in full golf apparel and he's like, holy shit, we just got evacuated from the golf course. And I'm like, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm here to pick up my dry cleaning. And I said, what golf course were you on? Because we have 2 in town. And he says, Thickwood, meaning the fire has just jumped the river. The Athabasca River, by the Thickwood Golf Course, is half a kilometer wide. So, continued Linder, Sam the dry cleaner, who's our buddy, is on the phone to his wife. Honey, it just jumped the river. Get out, get out, get out. In all this craziness, Sam still takes my dry cleaning, logs it, and he's like, Tuesday good? And I'm like, yeah, Tuesday's great. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on May 3rd, Linder tucked her laundry ticket safely in her wallet and aimed the Porsche for home. So that was 2 o'clock on May 3rd. This is 2:45. Gradually, and then suddenly. This is the Beacon Hill neighborhood. What you're seeing reflected there is the hood of Paul Ayer's truck. He's the last person out of there. He took this photo. And these sort of fireball and dragon-like things are rolling over his wife and daughter's cars. And I don't really know how anybody got out of there alive, but they did. And I asked him if he happened to notice the thermometer in his truck, and he said, I did notice it. And what did it say? He said 66 Celsius. And while he was sitting there, because he's in basically this Tim Hortons drive-through lineup, because everyone else is trying to get out of the neighborhood, one road out. Everyone else is trying to get out of the city, one road out. This was the biggest, most rapid evacuation due to fire in modern times. And he did not know this at the time, but he was at the end of it. And while he's sitting there waiting, a deer on fire runs into his truck. And so what's going on here is the radiant heat coming out of this fire. Radiant heat is invisible, of course. It's the heat that tells you not to touch the candle. It moves at the speed of light. And the radiant heat coming out of the fire was 500 Celsius. And so what that does is it desiccates everything in its path. And the other thing it does, why fire is hot, is not to give us energy and make us feel warm and cozy. Why fire is hot is to release hydrocarbons from potential fuel. And fire, it's like a baby. It doesn't like solid objects. It likes it nice and sort of soft and easy to deal with. And so what fire engages with is vapor. And so the heat is to release hydrocarbon vapor. So we can be looking at a fire over there and say, well, the fire is over there. And here is my home, and it's not on fire yet. But what the fire is seeing is this huge vapor cloud, like this aura of fuel around the house, around the car, around the fence, around the tree. And so this is generating terrific wind, and as the embers fly, maybe for 100 meters, maybe for 1,000 meters, they can land and they will burst into flame. They won't sizzle and sputter. And so that's how you got houses burning to the basement in 5 minutes. And when the firefighters were telling me this, I didn't believe them. I really thought this is the adrenaline talking. You lost track of time, understandably. And then I talked to different firefighters, and they said 6 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on where they were. So I talked to a physicist, and he confirmed that this was so, but he said, in order to understand this, you need to study the Hamburg firestorm, in which Allied bombers systematically engineered a firestorm in Hamburg, Germany in the summer of 1943. So in a sense, Fort McMurray bombed itself. And it was homes and black spruce that did it. So the other thing going on here is it's 33 Celsius. That's the ambient temperature. That's a southern temperature. We're in the subarctic, don't forget. There's ice on the lakes. But the other thing happening that's harder to see is the relative humidity. And so I started looking at weather records for that day, and I was seeing 11%, 12%. And that didn't mean anything to me until I started looking at where 11% and 12% humidity was normal, and where it's normal is Death Valley in Southern California in the month of July. And so now you transpose that humidity lack of humidity, that temperature to the boreal forest system, which is already naturally flammable, and you're not just going to have a big fire, you're going to have an explosive, extraordinarily dynamic firestorm. So that's what happened. And talking to firefighters, these are scrappy, rugby playing types, and a number of them said to me, we got our ass handed to us. And that's a hard thing for a firefighter to say. And they didn't stop. They worked day and night, and that's one of the indicators of 21st century fire, which is a term that I coined for this book because it behaves differently. And partly when you have that extra heat and lower humidity, fire has more possibility to just kind of exert itself. And the other thing it does is it doesn't sleep. So this is from the Prospect neighborhood. These houses are a year old, and they're $600,000 a pop. And they're obviously on fire. And one of the kind of chilling details I found was this photo was not taken on the night of May 3rd, when you would expect. It was not taken on the night of May 4th. This was taken on May 5th. This fire burned and raged inside Fort McMurray for basically as long as the Great Fire of London did, about 5 or 6 days. So it's so firefighters who are duty bound, committed to saving their town, fire's not sleeping, so they're not sleeping. So they're going 24 hours, going 48 hours, starting to hallucinate, stagger around. Their emotions are getting all, out of kilter. They're seeing their own houses burn down. But they didn't stop, And so this shows a characteristic of this fire in terms of the energy. So only a firefighter could have taken this picture. So this hose, is powerful enough to, knock you out of your chairs and send you out the back door. But here, where it turns gray up at the top there, you can see it bending. There's so much energy in that part of the burning neighborhood that it's basically taking the fire hose, bending it, vaporizing it, and sending it up into the fire column. And that fire column is now 45,000 feet tall. It's a pyrocumulonimbus fire system that really wasn't part of fire literature in the 20th century, and now it is. And so now we have one of these over Fort McMurray, and these things are so big they generate their own lightning, which can start fires many, many kilometers away. And the next time you're going to see that water, it's going to have no effect on the fire. It's going to go up and up and up the column until it hits around 30,000 feet, and then it's going to freeze, coalescing around embers and cinders and bits of house and tree, and come back to earth in a downdraft as black hail. And the only other time I read about black hail was in the Bible, in Exodus. So the water wasn't working, so they just started tearing the houses down. And there's a fire there. That looks like it's on fire, but they were bulldozing and tearing down new houses. And again, these houses are a year old. These are local guys. They know whose houses they're tearing down. Like, oh, there's so-and-so's crib. There's so-and-so's refrigerator. And they tore down millions and millions of dollars worth of houses that night. They also stopped the fire from progressing in that neighborhood. The fire kept going elsewhere. But I interviewed these guys, and they had some tales. This was taken by a guy named Ricky Vasberg on the first night of the fire. This is from Fort McMurray. We're looking back about 30K, and that flaming dome is the city. And a lot of people ran out of gas as they left. And they're saying they looked back and they saw this massive smoke plume, and they said it just looked like the city had been nuked. So this is a horrible sight, and in 2016 it was really quite a shocking sight for Canadians. But we've seen that. We've seen this a lot now, way too many times. In Hawaii and in Colorado and in Spain and Greece, Chile, and in British Columbia, and the totality of the destruction is just another one of these characteristics of 21st century fire. It has a kind of greediness to it, a rapacity to it. And these basements, they couldn't find the toilets. The toilets are ceramic. They are made in kilns. And in some of these places, they couldn't find the toilets because the toilets had vaporized. So when I looked at those ruins, I couldn't help but see this also. This is a different kind of ruin. This is that Syncrude in the back where Corey and Chandra used to work. They don't work there anymore. And this is part of the mine. And those white kind of rhomboid forms in the upper right there, those are sulfur piles that by volume are larger than the pyramids at Giza. And in the foreground are these little shed-like things, these little boxes. Those are T797 haulers, and they weigh 400 tons empty. The tires as tall as this ceiling. And there are hundreds of these things running around up there. It's a colossal sacrifice zone of 1,600 square kilometers and counting. So long before we split the atom, we were tampering with the Wizard's Book of Spells. We wanted fire's fierce energy in a bottle, a barrel, a pipeline, and we got it. Energy to burn, to power the world, and generate wealth beyond our wildest dreams. But as big oil supercharges our economy and its own bottom line with record profits, it's also supercharging our atmosphere with record quantities of greenhouse gases. CO2 levels are now fully 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Keeling curve of CO2, named for Charles Keeling, who came out of Caltech in the mid-50s, worked with Roger Revelle at the Scripps Institution. Both these guys were among several pioneers of climate science back in the 50s. So one way to understand capitalism as it's currently practiced is as a Ponzi scheme powered by fossil fuels and leveraged against the future of almost all living things. Looked at this way, the most accurate way to calculate the debt on our current system of fossil fuel-powered, that is, fire-powered civilization is by measuring CO2. CO2 is arguably the truest and simplest measure of the debt incurred by our devotion to and dependence on fossil fuels. And so if we understand CO2 as debt, then heat is the interest on that debt. So this is starting in 1850, running up to the present. We had a pretty cool 19th century. There's natural fluctuation in our climate. That's not untoward. And then we see it starting to jump up, and that all looks pretty normal until the 1980s. And then it stops wavering and just starts to march steadily upward. And again, look at 2023, that bar on the extreme right, that big jump. So starting around 2000, global temperatures began rising steadily and noticeably. That's when a lot of us sort of dialed into it. What this tells us is that our CO2 debt level has become unsustainable and the interest unpayable, to the point that we now find ourselves in the default zone. And typically, when we default on a loan, the bank calls in the debt. They might even repossess your stuff. And this is one way to understand the steady increase in fossil fuel-enhanced disasters. These floods, fires, heat waves, and intensifying storms are the Bank of Nature's repo men coming to collect on that debt, repossessing our homes, our cars, our towns, even our very lives. A more positive and forward-looking way to interpret this moment is as a stern invitation to mature out of petroleum-powered capitalism's dangerous delusion that A, nature is some kind of bottomless trust fund that we can draw on at will with no consequences, and B, that we're somehow in charge. I don't care what business you're in, nature owns 51% of it, at least. Until we respond meaningfully to the fact that nature has a controlling interest in everything we do, she'll continue to remind us in progressively more violent ways, and she'll continue collecting on that debt. So let's be clear. Coal is an 18th century fuel. Oil, which still drives about 80% of the world's economic activity, It's a 19th century fuel. The internal combustion engine was prototyped in 1860. Standard Oil, Exxon Esso, was founded in 1870. Bitumen, what they're mining and processing up in Fort McMurray, is not a fuel at all. It's a driveway sealer. In ancient times, bitumen was used as mortar to stick bricks together. In Alberta, Dene people used it to seal their canoes. It takes billions of cubic feet of natural gas every day to melt and fractionate bitumen into substances the American petroleum market will want to buy. And that's why Canada is a leader in CO2 generation per capita. So this is 1990 to 2030, and what you can see is our G7 countries. Canada is a member. It's a pretty nice group to be in. It means you're a wealthy, progressive country, and almost every nation is reducing its per capita CO2 in pretty dramatic fashion. You can see that UK and Germany are leading the charge. Even the US has dropped below 1990s level, but Canada isn't. And Fort McMurray is very proud of the fact that it's now broken the 4 million barrel a day mark of diluted bitumen. So why on earth are we still doing this, especially when scientists have understood the basics of the greenhouse effect literally since the 18th century? We've understood the heat-retaining qualities of CO2 since the 1850s. Scientists were speculating on industrial CO2's potential for altering the climate in the 1890s. The only reason we labor so hard to liberate coal, oil, and gas from the ground is so we can burn it. In other words, if you're in the petroleum industry, you're in the fire industry, which means you're in the CO2 industry, which means you're in the climate changing industry. And for all of us, petroleum is so ambient. You know, we're literally raised in it. We're effectively marinated in it. It feels right and normal. I like the smell of gas. I like the sound of an engine. I love to drive. I love a lot of the things that fossil fuels give me. But I didn't think of it as being fire because it's so well engineered, beautifully engineered. You know, we can get in the car and have a really beautiful, quiet conversation. It's almost as quiet as an electric car. But if we took an engine out of your Toyota and just mounted it on the stage here and let it go, it would deafen us and then kill us. So it took me 7 years to figure this out. But that's kind of where we are. We're kind of a fire cult in a way. And what's alarming and probably indictable is the fact that petroleum companies have known this for 50 years. In fact, they've been leaders in climate science. Some of you might be familiar with this, but this was an internal memo circulated among the top brass at Exxon back in the early 80s. This is based on 1970s science. It was clear in the 50s and 60s that CO2 was an issue for planetary health, and it was known that the fossil fuel industry, the petroleum industry, and coal industry were major sources. So this was the wealthiest company in the world at that time. They could hire the best scientists. They put some good scientists on it. And so these scientists kind of gamed out planetary CO2 over a 200-year period, starting in 1850, heading up to 2150. That horizontal line is what they predicted the climate would do if fossil fuels were not developed further. And if fossil fuels were developed further than they were at then 1970s levels and expanded at the rate they were predicted to based on demographics and a bunch of other information, that second arrow that goes heading off into the upper corner there is what they predicted. You can see the temperature on the left. You can see where it starts to be noticeable around 2000. These guys are working in the late 70s, and they got it basically exactly right. They nailed it. So this presented a quandary. How do you separate oil from fire or burning from emissions? You can't. And so starting in the 1980s, the industry, along with its allies in government and churches and finance and the media, embarked on a disinformation campaign to disavow and undermine their own science. And they've been doing it ever since. Now, in 2024, we find ourselves in an untenable contradiction. Last time I looked at the Suncor website, this is what it said: our purpose is to provide trusted energy that enhances people's lives while caring for each other and the earth. And if you were an American thinking about a Canadian oil company, this is what we would expect. What a beautiful company that must be. I'd like to work for them. I'd like to use their energy. It would be lovely if it was so. Suncor had a viable renewable energy business when that statement was written, but they sold that despite record-breaking profits. And I hired a new CEO, a former VP from Exxon down south named Rich Kruger, and this is what he told the press in 2023 while Canada was burning from end to end. So I'm not singling out individual people or companies here. This is just a local example of what every petroleum CEO has told the press over the past year. They're basically saying the money's too good. Exxon's Darren Woods got a 50% pay raise last year, while the median Exxon employee's wage dropped by 10%. Suncor enjoyed record profits too, and they also fired 1,500 workers. Houston, Texas, arguably the oil capital of the U.S., has shed 60,000 oil jobs over the past decade. Shell, a big player down there, is planning to lay off another 20% of its Houston workforce this year. Again, take a look at Shell's profits. Shareholders, it seems, come first, second, and third before workers, before the climate, before common decency, and even common sense. The Wall Street Journal, historically friendly to big business and big oil, is calling them out. Exactly a year ago, they published an expose entitled Inside Exxon's Strategy to Downplay Climate Change. How is this okay? How is it that the fossil fuel industry, the planet's biggest contributor of carbon and methane emissions, along with the banks that finance it, the institutions and pensions that invest in it, and the governments that subsidize it, gets a pass, not just from responsibility, but even from accountability to the laws of chemistry and physics? This is magical thinking. And so we have to ask, how is it not a crime to knowingly and enthusiastically and willfully sabotage the future? Really? WTF. Why do they do that? Well, so here's one reason. This is Alex Steffen again from Berkeley. He coined a term called predatory delay. The deliberate slowing of change to prolong a profitable but unsustainable status quo whose costs will be paid by others. John Kenneth Galbraith, a U.S. economist, ambassador, and author, born in Canada, wrote, "People of privilege will risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage." I suspect many of us, consciously or unconsciously, are doing this too. Loyalty to the status quo, especially when it's rewarding, is extraordinarily powerful and often corrupting. I think it derives from a reflexive allegiance to the status quo. Many people see change as inconvenient, uncomfortable, even threatening. Some might call this impulse selfishness or greed, and I do believe there are instances of what can legitimately be called malignant cynicism. But I also think of Chandra Linder. The city's on fire, but I still want to do my dry cleaning, or graduate from university, or see the world, or go to law school, or have a kid, or sell real estate. Most of us have plans for our day, for our lives, and they don't include climate change. So this is where we find ourselves in 2024, while temperatures spike around the globe and while cities and towns continue to burn and flood. Petroleum executives are saying in public, we are choosing profits over people and the planet. So we need to focus on this, and many people are. More than a quarter of Americans, there are a third of a billion Americans now, more than a quarter of them now live in states and municipalities suing oil companies over their climate lies. We also need to focus on the earth. Oh, there's a wonderful lawsuit that's moving forward in Canada that was launched by some young people, and Eco-Justice is pushing it, and it just made it to another level. But we must also focus on the earth, which is telling us by every means available that we need to transition away from carbon-intensive energy as rapidly as possible. So we can do this by choosing policy and elected officials who prioritize climate and environmental health, which is our health, and which is feeling really hard to do in British Columbia right now. But, and we can make decisions in our own communities and lives about how we derive and use our energy and about how we want to live. A lot of people want to live differently. And there's a renewable energy transition underway right now, even though it's really hard to feel it or notice it in Canada. So this is something amazing that the UK did. The UK, in a way, has been the model for a fossil fuel-powered economy, a fossil fuel-powered civilization. And coal, even when I was a kid, was just standard operating procedure for the UK. You could not imagine a functioning UK without it. Now, this year, 2024, they shut down their last coal-fired power plant. And so that is, small on the planetary scale, but massive symbolically, that this country, who basically showed us how to be petrocapitalists, has moved on. This is U.S. per capita gasoline consumption, gallons per month, which peaked in the mid-70s. Obviously, there are many more Americans now. It's now the biggest oil producer, but the per capita petroleum consumption has dropped dramatically. These are UK emissions, which track from 1850 to the present, and the UK per capita is down around 1870s levels. Texas is, the Alberta of the United States. They have a climate denial policy. They are pretty hostile to the federal government. It's a kind of a scary place to be a woman or to be kind of anyone who isn't a white Christian man. And yet, they are leaning into renewable energy harder than any other American state. You'd think California or New York would be the leader. Texas is the leader. Texas is leading the continent in renewable energy generation. So it's kind of an exciting prospect. And as I wrap up here, I want to leave you with a really potent word. And these are batteries. The potent word is not, actually, the potent word should be batteries, because amazing things are happening, and this is just a chart showing how much more efficient they're becoming and how rapidly that's happening. So that's quite exciting. But the potent word is reverescence, and it means to revitalize, regenerate, and regrow. This is what the earth wants to do. Growing, flourishing is the earth's default mode. After the fire passes over, this is what's waiting underground. And you remember how hot it was, how intensely the fire burned. And all this was done on petroleum energy, and people moved up there to cash in on this incredible bonanza. And strangely enough, the one thing that survived that fire was the one thing that was done that wasn't about money. Someone planted those because they would be beautiful at some future time that they couldn't see. And these were only 5 inches under the ground. They're that deep. And again, the basement right behind there was, got to kiln temperatures enough to melt and vaporize ceramic plumbing. And somehow, these living beings weathered that and popped back up. So they're the only thing that survived in that neighborhood. And so what I see here is this kind of defiance. Basically, do your worst to me, and I will still return in beauty. And I took a teaching from that. Nature is showing us. It's modeling for us to be like those tulips. So the question I ask myself, and all of us really, is who's stopping us? And so I'm going to stop there. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, John. We've got approximately 30 minutes to take some audience questions before we get you to put some ink on books. We've got a pair of wireless mics. Please raise your hand. We'll come around. Sandy and I will alternate. Just hold it close to your mouth. Questions concise and frame them into formal questions. All right. Don't be shy. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I read your book and really enjoyed it. If that's the word. Very depressing, obviously. I know you ended the book and you ended your talk with this kind of hopeful take on what can or what might or should happen. But you know, I'm almost like a fatalist about it. Like I look around and I see things like skip the dishes. I mean, skip the dishes. Why wouldn't you do the dishes? You know, I mean, the entire culture is built around convenience and consumption.
Yeah.
No, even the people who sympathize with that or are against that kind of use it. You know what I mean? Like I don't really feel that hopeful.
It's it kind of depends on where I look. I thought a lot about this, and I really come back to William Gibson, and there are sort of extraordinary changes happening that are moving the needle in real time, but in both directions. And so you look at Uruguay. So it's a not insignificant country in Latin America where they've decided at the federal level to become a renewable energy-driven economy. They have about 10 years left of oil. They're an oil exporter. They can see the end, and they're trying to, and they can see the climate, which is, you know, very dramatic changes down there. And they've decided to lean into the future, which is a renewable energy future, which is a low carbon energy future. And then you look at Paris, which for the past 100 years has been a traffic-choked, smog-choked, physically dangerous city to be a pedestrian in. And one mayor and city council are changing it in real time to pedestrian-friendly, transit-friendly, two-wheel, traffic-friendly city for the first time, like since there were horses. So this is happening right now, and that those kinds of changes are going to have a ripple effect. A lot of people want them. Canada is still captive to the petroleum industry. Canada has really never been able to shake the Hudson's Bay Company, I don't think, and still dealing with that. So I don't know if Canada's the place to look, but you look at China, and they are laying on renewable energy to the tune of about 10 gigawatts every 2 weeks. A gigawatt will electrify, will power about 750,000 to 1 million homes. And when you are a dictator and you have control of things, you can do what you want. And what he has decided to do is electrify the country on renewables. And they were going to have a nuclear program. They saw what happened at Fukushima in Japan about 10 years ago, and they decided to not do that and lean even harder into renewable energy. So we're in this colossal transformation right now that's happening more rapidly than ever, and you also have fossil fuel companies doing everything they can to maximize their profits while they can. At the same time, University of Calgary shut down its petroleum engineering program due to lack of interest. I was talking to a French lawyer, and he said, you know, when he was younger, Total, the national oil company, would cherry pick, you know, just like law firms do at Harvard and Yale, they would cherry pick all the best law students to go work at Total because it was big money and high status. He said now they're picking from the bottom third of law students. And I said, well, why is that? And he was translating for me. He said, because the smarter ones don't want the stain. So these are young people, you know, moving the needle in these sort of subtle ways that we would that are very hard to calculate or measure. But we're in a colossal transformation right now. And at the same time that CO2 is rising, methane is rising, the planet is changing radically. But we don't know how this story ends. I do know that the planet is extraordinarily resilient. That said, we're obviously losing species. If you want to really bum yourself out, you can just sort of look at coral reefs and really focus on that, and that is colossally depressing. And I don't see how you get out of that. But we have to look elsewhere and look for me, like I go toward the light. That's how I get up in the morning, and that is sort of a personal kind of challenge. It's almost like a practice. People talk a lot about hope, and Rebecca Solnit, thinks of it as a verb. It's an action. I think of it as sort of a practice. I don't know if even hope is that really useful a word exactly, but more just moving in the direction that feels healthy and workable to you. But we're all going to see how this ends. I think even 10 years ago, a lot of boomers thought, well, I'll be dead. I'm cool. And however sad they might be about that, but we're all going to see it. By 2030, we're going to have a good sense of where things are going.
You had a graph up there of the UK with the coal consumption way up, and then it is kind of way down.
Yeah.
What do they put in its place as an energy source?
They got a lot of wind and solar, but also a lot of gas, and so they've got just a different energy mix, and it totally generates less CO2. They also have North Sea oil, so like it depends on how you want to quantify it. But if you look at per capita, I think there's 60 million people in the UK. So per capita, their CO2 output is down to 1870s levels, whereas Canada's is going up or is not dropping at the speed that it could. So again, it's happening unevenly, but it's happening. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Hey there.
Thank you so much for your talk. And oh my goodness, thanks so much for your talk.
I hear you now.
And also thank you for highlighting the narrative of optimism. I think that's something that's not often highlighted when we talk about climate. I was wondering how your research changed over those 7 years, especially among that narrative of maybe optimism or doomerism, or if there was maybe a different take 7 years ago, or if you had an idea of where the book was going.
Well, that's a lot of no, I didn't really know. We were talking about this earlier in a class today, how novel writers often talk about this experience of about a third of the way into the novel, the characters start telling them what to do, telling the writer what to do. And there's an element of that in nonfiction too. The story starts to kind of guide you, and that depends on who you're talking to, the things you learn. I wasn't, looking at it from the point of view of optimism or doomerism. I just understood, as many climate people understood, that we were into a new era of fire. And Fort McMurray was a really good place to try to understand that, because so many really far out, bizarre things happen there. So I wanted to understand that. And and then basically fire kind of took over the narrative. I was planning to write about a lot of other stuff up there, and fire kind of took on, it became the lead character. And that was a weird idea that I did not think of. It just, as I was saying earlier today, when you're writing narrative nonfiction, you're often looking for a character to carry you through the narrative. Maybe it would be a firefighter, maybe it would be the mayor or somebody like that. Well, this fire was so big and lasted so long and impacted so many different places in different ways, there's no one person who could do that. But then you've got to ask yourself, I realized maybe 2/3 of the way into it, who's in every scene? Fire's in every scene. So maybe it's Fire's book. So that the whole question of doomerism versus optimism, I personally think doomerism is a kind of indulgence that you have to be wealthy to have. Poor people aren't doomers, they're too busy living, trying to survive. There's another question. So if you can pick them, David, and hey there. Hi.
Hi, yes, I know I have your book, Fire Weather. I read in The Guardian some time ago that you have a word, infandus,
Yeah.
which is a thing too horrible to be named, hence there can be no plans to face it.
Yeah.
What we see a lot of in the election in British Columbia as well, we see the predatory delay happening. They say that, yes, there is climate change, but it's not really caused by human beings.
Yeah.
And I wonder if after some time, you have another word that is impossible to deny.
Well, see, I would call that malignant cynicism or something like that. You know, it is deeply, deeply cynical. It is a lie, and it's a very, very dangerous delusion. So that I'm not really in the business of coining too many words. Like 21st century fire is one, but I'm sort of on the spot here. But it's yeah, no, it is really shocking and deeply, embarrassing and shameful to live in a province where people in leadership can be so out of touch with the very obvious facts, especially when British Columbia has basically become a poster child for climate impacts. So, it's kind of insane. And I don't have I don't know how we get out of that one except to vote for different people, and that's a separate conversation, I think. But it's we're all living in that crazy dissonance, and it can make you feel kind of crazy. I feel it anyway. Hi.
I'll keep it short but sweet in the interest of time. Can we address the climate crisis and keep the stuff? You seem very optimistic about the transition onto renewable resources, renewable energy sources. Is that viable?
No. I think degrowth is the next piece of this. And so I refer you to Jason Hickel. He writes really well about that. Yeah, there's no way, with Amazon Prime, if we're going to get where we need to get to. And that, what's amazing is, ever since Rumsfeld or Cheney or whoever it was said it, the American way of life is non-negotiable, which is obviously patent baloney, but it has become heretical to talk about degrowth, you think about like this old notion, the love that dare not say its name. Well, the climate solution that dare not say its name is degrowth and rationing. And it's amazing how seldom we kind of want to have our cake and eat it too, but it's a very mealy-mouthed way to go into the future. And we absolutely have to reduce, and the fact is we are going to, because nature will impose it on us. But already most of us are living in smaller spaces. Young people live in smaller spaces. Cars are less and less a feature, a thing that they want to have, at least the urban ones. I'm just looking at my own kids who grew up automotive, but don't seem to be interested in having a car of their own and really see the world very differently. I read an interesting stat about clothing. And so you've got fast fashion on the one hand, super disposable in a kind of ridiculous way to dress oneself. But apparently, I think in 2023 or 2024, 10% of the world clothing market was vintage or reused clothes. So that's a not insignificant percentage of 8.5 billion people's clothing. So, so the short answer is yes. I think, to your question, which is, or rather no, we cannot. It's no, yeah. You take that to the bank. But thanks for bringing it up, because it's the elephant in the room. Hi.
Thanks so much for the talk. I was wondering if you thought the forestry sector near the Fort McMurray region was a contributing factor to the fire, and if not, in that specific instance, if you feel that forestry in Western Canada, Alberta, BC is a contributing factor to the severity of fires we're seeing in recent years. Thank you.
I do. I absolutely think the forestry sector is a contributor to forest fires. It's sort of above my pay grade. I thought I would be focusing, again, I had a lot of thoughts about what I would be writing about when I started this book, and the fire really just took over. So logging is not a really big thing in the northern boreal. Trees are too small, the ground is so boggy, it's difficult to work in. The wood, has probably value for pulp and things like that, but it's not, logging is not a big thing. They have, when they plowed off that 1,600 square kilometers of the boreal forest, they didn't really log those trees, they just kind of plowed them down and piled them up and left them, as far as I know. Maybe they burned some of them, but it's not a big industry up there. So that's, it's more pretty much wild forest from what I understand. So that's a different case than further south. And I think plantation, planting, monocropping makes fires worse, makes recovery slower, and deprives and degrades the soil. And we're seeing a lot of that down south. But again, that's not something I can. The regions are so specific and the issues are so particular, and I just don't have the info. Sorry. Hi.
Hi. So I'm from Alberta, and both my parents work in oil and gas. And I've kind of tried to have a conversation about this with them, which has gone really well every time. And it always kind of comes around to I say this is bad, and they're like, well, what do you want us to do about it? This is our livelihood, this is our jobs, we're providing for you, our family. And obviously I'm not asking you to have a solution to that, but how would you respond to that?
I'm so glad you brought that up, and I commend you for trying to have the conversation. It's a really difficult one to have, and I think it's very easy to kind of fall into these well-worn grooves, and so we need to find new language, and that's what I tried to do in fire weather. But one of the things, I brought a lot of baggage to Fort McMurray with me because I'm a kind of enviro guy from Vancouver, and I realized very quickly, really before I went there, that baggage would really get in my way. And so I really tried to open myself up and leave as much of that behind me as I could and just get to know the folks who were up there. And the fact is, nobody goes up there because it's so beautiful and the lifestyle is so fabulous. It's people are going up there for the money, and it's not generally because they're insanely greedy. It's because they really are trying to kind of move the needle on their own lives. And a third of Fort McMurray is from Newfoundland, and the cod fishery crashed in '92. Generations of folks there have grown up on the dole, have grown up the butt of Canadian jokes about ignorance and poverty. And so you get up to Fort McMurray, and all of a sudden you're making some real coin, and you don't have to buy a used car. You can buy a new car. You can go home and drive around and take your mom for a ride, and you're a player now. And how do you fault someone for wanting that and for wanting to give their kids to give you something that they may not have had themselves? And that's not at all to lay a trip on you, but I do think that it's different if you're sort of a 25-year-old single guy, and there's that element too, and there's a lot of dysfunction, and God was just telling me about this plane that he was on coming out of Fort Mac going to Toronto, and they had to land it in Saskatoon because everybody was so shit-faced that the pilot couldn't fly. It was a jet. It was a big plane, and the people, Fort McMurray got so unruly on that plane they had to land it. So there's a whole bunch of sort of toxic nonsense going on up there. But there are also a bunch of sincere people who are really trying to build something. And my guess is those are your parents. And here you are, you vet, attending this. And, if it was up there, if it was a big solar panel factory up there, maybe they'd be working there too. I think most people are into the money and not into the industry. And I think we really need to draw a distinction between the worker, who's really just trying to do a righteous thing that all of us here are trying to do, which is kind of keep ourselves going from day to day and maybe have a family, maybe pay a mortgage, and the owners who have a lot more leverage and maneuverability and also have a lot more information about the impacts of their industry, and are just deciding to, say to hell with it. We're just going to go for it. We're going to make as much money as possible, and that is a kind of really out of date point of view that is not going to serve them well, because you can't hide from the smoke, you can't hide from the heat. Whatever they're able to build, and a whole bunch of Alberta people built in West Kelowna, and that hasn't gone so well. And so it's a really difficult time, though, and I think it's a really difficult time for people in that industry, because the other thing, even more valuable than our job, is our social standing and security. And so you may be in Fort McMurray, and you may understand CO2, and you may realize, wow, I need to shower 3 times to get the stink of this bitumen off me, which is the case for some people working there. And at the same time, if I say anything about it, that's going to compromise my position in my community. Because now I'm biting the hand that feeds me, and like, who the hell are you to do that? And it's a little bit like cops or firefighters maybe blowing the whistle on untoward behavior. Well, your lives depend on those people. And if you're now criticizing them or talking out of school, the next time a dangerous situation comes up, they may not cover you. And so it doesn't have to be your physical safety, there's also our social and communal safety. And you can compromise that by speaking out against the industry that's feeding all of you, that's really creating what in fact is, for many people up there, quite a beautiful life, a kind of suburban simulacrum in the subarctic. And even though incidents of asthma are higher, incidents of cancer are higher, but you're still able to provide things for the kids you love. And I hope you get to be a parent someday, and it is the love you feel for your kids, and we will burn the world down for our kids. It's a weird concept. It doesn't make sense, but that's that devotion we have is very, very powerful. And so I think that's something. I have no idea what the rest of your relationship is like with them, and that's private. But my guess is they really love you a lot, and they really want you to have good and beautiful things, and to become a healthy whole person. And so it's a tough one. But what I would say, I don't know how many young people are here, not that many by the look of it, but what I would really say is the job of young people is not to fix this, but to become the healthiest, most whole person you can, to get to know who you are, to get to know what you are, and to build a good community. And our job, the elders' job, is to hold the space for you while you do that, and to figure this other, stuff out. And you'll come up into it. There's enough for everybody. But right now, it's to get educated, to figure out who and what you are, and what you're made of, and what you care about. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Can you speak a bit to the regenerative qualities of wildfires, why we need them, why the planet needs them?
Well, it's different everywhere. Like the Amazon jungle does not need a wildfire, and it's burning right now. So that's not good. The boreal, regenerative. The boreal forest is a phoenix among ecosystems. It has to burn in order to regenerate. Serotinous cones are the conifer cones that will not open unless they're heated to temperatures higher than sunlight can achieve. They have to be fire hot for the cones to pop and release the seeds. And that tells the seeds that the canopy is now open, that the ground is now clear, and it's their turn. And so it really depends. It's kind of like logging practices. It's super ecozone specific. So it's just not sensible to make blanket statements about fire on the landscape. But there are lots of places where it's normal and natural. And but then it's how often is an issue, and how intense is another issue. So when you have lower humidity and greater heat, you're going to have a more intense fire, and that will impact the soils and cryptobiotic material and all stuff in the soil that really is the origin, the kind of foundation of life. And if that gets too hot, then you kind of cauterize the ground, and that compromises everything. So there's a lot to this, and a lot of it is above my pay grade.
We take a couple more. I'm conscious that I had John talking for 3 hours today on campus. I'm
not really happy that as long as people want to go.
Hi, firstly, I was in David's class earlier, so I feel very lucky to be able to listen to you speak twice. Earlier, when we were talking about taking on stories such as this, you recommended living in the towns that you're investigating and talking to these people and building these connections organically. And a couple of my friends afterwards, we were wondering how you go about note-taking, because you really emphasized how hard it is to gain these people's trust. And I also understand that while doing environmental journalism myself here at UVic, I understand that sometimes it can seem very daunting and provide an unintentional barrier between you and the interviewee, and it's really hard to balance that genuineness while seeming like a very scary, intimidating reporter.
So the first thing I would say is I'm a writer from Vancouver, and I'm here to write about this fire. And can I talk to you about it? And so then you can have the notebook out, then you mind if I record? You can have that out. And so then it's really clear what the dynamic is, and they can choose if they want to participate in that or not. I hope I'm answering your question. And then, initially it might be kind of weird and awkward for them to have a mic or somebody taking notes. But usually you get past that, and then they just start to roll. And so then you're writing frantically or recording. I usually do both at the same time. I don't try to write down everything they say. I used to do that, but I have terrible handwriting. So it's so you're just trying to establish a rapport, and what I always do is kind of bend over to where they're at. And so, like if they say something racist to me, I'm not going to call them on it. I'm in their world, and I'm there to listen to how they see the world. That's why I'm there. I'm not there to fix them, correct them, challenge them, have a debate with them. I'm simply there, what's it like for you? And see where it goes. And usually it does not go into racism and bigotry. It goes into, I didn't know where my daughter was. And I tried to call her, but there were 30,000 other people trying to make calls, and so I couldn't communicate with her. And so my wife and I didn't know whether to leave or not, because we didn't know where our daughter was. So now do I go and leave and look for my daughter, but there's terrible traffic, so I can't get anywhere. So now you're really into the meat of the thing. And also the thing that really unites all of us, because anybody with a daughter is going to relate to that. It doesn't matter where you are on the petroleum renewable spectrum or on the race spectrum or anything. It's super primal, and that's one reason I like those kind of stories, is it really cuts through a lot of superficial noise and gets down to what are the things we care most about. And these are kind of basic human values and needs. And does that answer your question?
I guess what I'm more so curious about is, earlier you mentioned, I don't know how often this occurs for you, but when it's more of an impromptu conversation, if you just offhandedly meet somebody for a drink or for coffee, like you run into somebody and then you start talking without necessarily being prepared to receive all the information.
Yeah.
Like how do you balance then making sure what you remember is factual?
I don't usually do that. I have a notebook, like if I'm going to Fort McMurray, I got a notebook and a phone on me all the time, so I'm always ready. So yeah, I don't do that. I mean, occasionally, like I was standing in the lineup with this, a guy from Sri Lanka, the security guard, and I quote him at the end, and I didn't interview him, but we were just chatting, and I said, were you here for the fire? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, how was it for you? What was it like for you? And he said, oh, I grew up in a war zone. It was nothing to me. And, that was awesome line, super good corrective, because we're all, oh, my stuff and my kids, and da-da-da-da-da. We live in Canada. What do we know, really, most of us, about deprivation and suffering and real danger, like people trying to kill you? And so this guy had a really different perspective on his fire, fire schmire, try and order. And so that was good. But I didn't know his name. He was gone before it was over, before I had a chance to really engage with him, because we were in this lineup. And so that was an instance where, I don't name him or describe him too much, but I use the quote. So, I don't know exactly what the ethics are around that, but he hasn't found me yet. And it's not a damning line. It's actually really, really good for Canadians to know that. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for speaking with us. I'm a master's student here at UVic and a member of Coastal Climate Solutions Leaders program, and I'm doing my research on sort of energy transitions and in fossil fuel communities. So, and I'll be quick with the question. So, kind of building on that last question, you said when you spoke to people, you would say, I'm here to write about fire. You didn't say, maybe, I'm here to write about climate change. And so I'm interested, if I'm going into these communities, if I want to have productive conversations, should we not be saying climate change? Should we be talking about the fire and the economics?
I think that's legit. Kind of the same way Biden didn't call it, the Green New Deal or the renewable energy. He called it the Inflation Reduction Act. And so that, plays really well with plays really well with everybody, but it plays really well with conservatives. And then you can build a pile of windmills and solar panels. And so I think it's, why use lightning rod language that's been contaminated and polluted not by you. You didn't do it. So I think that's a good challenge for writers, just to find a different noun or a different verb that isn't the one that you see in the media all the time, where that has been weaponized or poisoned by someone, a partisan player. So I think to go in with kind of more neutral language, or choose an aspect of it that's less contentious, and then kind of see where that goes, build some trust, and then you can kind of mention the C word, and see how that goes, And I never asked people in Fort McMurray about climate. I thought right now things are really going well. They're really open with me. And I feel like they've taken such a beating from the left. They've taken such a beating. They're quite sensitive, and white fragility is the greatest sensitivity of all sensitivities, I think. And it's in force up there. So I just didn't want to poke that bear, really. And I didn't see the benefit in it. But nobody brought it up. And I think partly because that's part of this, that this person meant that I was speaking to, that this feeling of solidarity. You don't want to break ranks. And again, our social stability is the most important to us of all things, I think. And one way to compromise that in a community that is already feeling embattled is to raise those issues. So is that helpful? Yeah, there's a woman here too. Why don't you go next, man? This fellow is going to go. Oh, I guess he's handing you the mic. It's your lucky day.
Out of curiosity, what sort of feedback have you had from Fort McMurray?
Yeah, that's pretty quiet up there. I don't want to. I'm smiling, but I'm also. It's really a difficult thing in that I haven't gotten criticism either, at least not that's come to me. And so far, nobody has tried to sue me either.
Can't get it out there.
And I tried to go back, and it didn't work out for a bunch of reasons. And then I generally go where I'm invited. You know, I got invited to be here. Thank you again for that. And so that's why I'm here. And I went to Calgary right when the book first came out, and that was a really intense experience. It was a special event for the Calgary Writers Festival, which just finished, but I came by myself. They have a beautiful facility in the Carnegie Library there in downtown Calgary, and it was packed, and it was humming. And like this room was humming in a kind of happy conversational way, that room had a sort of hornet-like, hornet energy to it. And I've been to a lot of readings and been in a lot of rooms where there was anticipation, and this was a different energy in the room, and I didn't really know why. And anyway, I went in, I knew I was among oil people, so I chose my words carefully. You know, I was tactful, and it went really well. And only afterward did my host, the mighty Shelley Youngblood, who runs the festival there, is really an amazing person. She said, "That's Suncor's head of comms over there, and that's the chief crown prosecutor of Fort McMurray there, and that's, you know, thus and such and so and so." And Chandra, the woman I read from about, she was there with her husband Corey, and you know, it was positive but weird. And I think what's difficult, and this goes back to that kind of opening, closing rank, I didn't say anything that was untrue. I didn't beat up on anybody. I didn't shame anybody. It's difficult. And I think people may intellectually know it, but not necessarily want to endorse it. But you know, I think, so you could say, well, maybe they all hate it because nobody said anything. I think the fact that nobody has hated on me is a more, I'm an optimist, I guess, but I'm taking that as the indicator that I didn't blow it, you know, completely. And you know, but I also thought about them every day as I wrote. You know, I was not thinking about how are people at UVic going to respond to this. I thought about how is Carol Christian going to respond? How is Paula Ayers going to respond when I write this sentence, when I write that sentence, you know? And you know, there's some hard truths in there. So there's a fellow in blue, and then you. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. I didn't really enjoy your book, but I certainly appreciated it. And because it's not something, you know, reading you get great joy out of, but you learn a lot, and I really appreciate what you've done with that. I have a question with you with respect to leadership in going forward and trying to get our emissions and whatnot down.
Yeah.
A lot of people in BC in particular have great faith in indigenous communities to assist in the leading of addressing a lot of these issues. And I'm wondering how one squares that with 110 bands trying to buy the Trans Mountain Pipeline, with another group of bands in the Northwest wanting to build a gas pipeline to their participant in another natural gas LNG plant, where the LNG plant that's going up there now, Canada LNG, our own climate secretary, Ministry of Environment, did a study a decade ago that showed that one plant would have twice the emissions of all BC currently. And its life cycle emissions.
Yeah, no, it's just, and one way to think about that is to think about why would, you know, thousands of people from Newfoundland go up to Fort McMurray. You know, a lot of people want to have their turn and their piece of something. And the LNG issue is a really thorny one because demand is going down in Europe for it, as I understand it. Because people, really thanks to Putin, and they didn't want to be associated or basically be jerked around by this tyrant, and they didn't want to be beholden to him for their oil and gas, and so they really leaned into renewables, and that's one reason there's so much progress. There's so, in a weird way, Putin has really been an ally in the transition because he's just such a, you know, and a terrible, terrible human being. And so I'm not quite sure where all that natural gas is even going to go, except into maybe refining bitumen. I mean, the circle of doom up there is, you know, of just petroleum orgy is grotesque, and it's very localized, and Canada is the wealthiest nation in the world per capita in terms of renewable energy potential. You know, if you look at our rivers, if you look at our, you know, infinite sun, 3 oceans of tidal, etc., if we pursued renewables with the zeal and subsidies with which we pursued bitumen and now natural gas, you know, we can power the continent on renewables. And, you know, it would have to be a mission that people bought into, but it was really hard to make bitumen profitable. It was extraordinarily difficult to make those machines work in that climate. Super hard. And people really sacrificed physically and financially. There was incredible economic uncertainty most of the time for 50 years. So if we can do that, why can't we do this? And so in the meantime, we're just seeing these kind of climate disasters unfold. And I don't know. You know, I just don't see how it sustains itself. I don't see how we have 100 years of profitable LNG and happy, prosperous bands enjoying that largesse. Because the planet is going to be changing, and I think the appetite for LNG is also going to be changing. And there, you know, it doesn't feel realistic or feasible or forward-looking. But it's totally alarming and very disempowering to look at from this vantage. So I don't have a super useful comment. Sorry about that. It's really just, it just feels like such the wrong direction to be going. And so patently clear that that's so. And it's just amazing how the stories we tell ourselves to make it work.
We've got time for 2 questions, and you were sitting in the front row, which I appreciate as a teacher.
Thank you, John. Your book, The Tiger, was absolutely amazing, and this one needed to be written. I'm from Fort McMurray.
Oh, well.
My home was right in the middle there.
Oh, Jesus.
And
wow.
I have to say that keep up the good work, and do have hope. You know, I think that this is a hard problem for all of us, because the very companies that you kind of quoted in here, for instance, Suncor or CNRL, as you know, they are the largest holdings of our pensions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we're talking about making money, it's for us.
Yeah.
Everyone in this room that wants to retire, excuse me, is beholden to the success of these companies. And I moved from here to Vancouver, from Fort Mac to Vancouver Island. You know, I was shocked when I came here because I thought that this province was different, and the same exact industry runs BC.
Yeah.
The largest exports from here are coal and natural gas.
Yeah, you got that right.
And we are also beholden to them in our politics. So I guess my question was, because I had one sitting on for a little while after this, woman was talking about access to people. The question was, did you, during the course of writing this book, have a chance to go beyond Melissa Blake and Darby Henderson and some of the people that you spoke to in Fort Mac? At the local level, did you talk to anybody at the provincial or federal level? And would you have wanted to?
You know, thanks for a bunch of things. I'm really glad you're here. And I just, and you know, I was up there. Did you evacuate? Were you part of that?
I had a ball of fire come at me, right in that tree line that was 150 feet tall.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and so.
No warning.
Yeah, I mean, it's just.
So yeah, I evacuated. I was the first one back in town.
Wow. Yeah, and then what you see is so shocking, and I don't know if you don't need to read Fire Weather because you lived it, but.
No, the talk, like especially throughout the first couple chapters, like how you anthropomorphized fire was incredible.
Yeah.
Like talking about it as a living, breathing thing that has purpose.
Yeah, appetite.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. That alone, like I had to stop and reread that 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Glad it
Finish that book.
But Jesus, I mean, it just, walking the ground up there and seeing that and talking to people and what they lost, and it's really gutting. So, just, my condolences, and I'm really glad you're safe. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people cried talking to me, and I cried too. And I've done this a lot now, but I would just lose it like the first probably 40 times I presented this. I'd get to a part, and it's really hard. And I got to like the people that I interviewed, and to see what they went through and their suffering. Really, one of the reasons I wrote the book is as a PSA, because it can happen here. And on that note, it almost happened in Vancouver in August. And if you want to read my op-ed about it, it's an August 12th issue of the Globe and Mail. But we damn near had a catastrophic fire in Vancouver, and it was not super hot, it wasn't super windy, but the fire, you could see the fire in broad daylight from 40 kilometers away. And you probably never had no idea that happened, but it happened 2 months ago. So, what you got a glimpse of the future that is potential for all of us, and that's part of why I wrote the book, is you folks saw something, and you have information for us. And I wrote Fire Weather to be a delivery system for the hard learnings. That's really what I try to do. I kind of forgot your question because I'm kind of overwhelmed.
I was asking about access to
Oh, yeah.
We talked about like access around Fort Mac.
Yeah.
I know that it can be an outsider, a little bit of a hostile place.
It feels like a police state to me, honestly, and all of Alberta does too. I mean, just talking to the wildfire managers, I can't talk to you, man. I can't talk to you. If they knew I was talking to you, I might lose my job. You go down and talk to Cal Fire in California. They got media people. They take you out to the fire line. They give you access to fire chiefs. They're amazing. And Alberta, it's shameful to control information that way. And, that's more like Stephen Harper's jam, but that's Alberta's jam. And so it was weird up there, and I didn't want to, frankly, talk to the mayor or to Darby that much, because they had worked out their story already, and I was sure I was going to get spun.
They quit, they left.
Yeah, they split also. Except for Bernie Schmidt, he got a kick upstairs.
Yeah.
And so I thought, no, I want to hear from people like yourself who went through it, who had to react to it. And that, I think, is a more valuable story. I think given where the book has gone, it was a better choice. And I just found myself not interested in what the upper levels thought. I really wanted to know what your neighbors experienced and felt and lost and learned, So that to me felt like a more, intellectually more interesting, but also more valuable. Here's something that you would appreciate this. So that the former fire chief, Harvey Marchand, before Darby, I ran into him. He came up because there were, all these investigations into the fire and lawsuits and all this kind of stuff. And he said to me, we were sitting right in City Hall on Franklin Street, and he said, it's really, I can't remember if he said it was a drag or it really stinks, but you really don't want to get subpoenaed. And I couldn't tell if he was threatening me or warning me. And I couldn't tell if he said, hey, little boy, you don't want to be messing around in this stuff. Because he could tell I was investigating. Or if maybe he'd been subpoenaed himself and just, you don't want to go through that. He said, because they can take everything. So I took it as a warning, and I immediately called my publisher, and I immediately said, I need to talk to your legal counsel right now before I go any further with this. And, what are my rights? How are you going to cover me if things go sideways? And then I kept going. But I just had no faith or hope of being able to talk to oil executives. Andrew Nikiforuk did, in his tar sands book. And he got really good access, and it's really amazing journalism, that he did in that book. And I just went in a different direction. And people's experience with fire and fire's experience with people is, really where I landed.
The drunken guy there.
What's that?
The drunken guy in Amsterdam.
Yeah, God, Wayne McGraw, what a badass.
I don't know you got that one.
Jeez, he just wanted to tell it, and it was an incredible story. I barely edited that, just him riffing. But Harvey Marchand, I feel like in a way did me a favor, and so we, had really good legal reads done to the manuscript, and so far, no blowback. And yeah, I think people have got a pretty honest, unvarnished view of the thing. And but goddamn, I'm just really glad you made it out of there. It just killed, like thinking what Paul Ayers went through. He had to go find his son was up at Wolf, I forget one of the lodges, and he snuck back into the city. I know you read that section, but people love their kids, and he needed his family together, and it's just a terrible thing to have them separated like that. So anyway, thank you for